According to a 2001 paper by Takashi Maruta, anti-jury sentiments came in 3 flavors. Some have said that the Japanese people, in their deference to and respect for authority, would rather have officially certified judges hand down criminal verdicts. Others have argued that the general citizenry, being used to such deference, regardless of whether they might agree with such authority, would not be fit to adjudicate trials due to a lack of experience or the proper mindset. Finally, the issue of cost has been brought up, that jury trials are more expensive than those without. Maruta disagrees with these points' relevance. While jurors can be biased, so too are judges human, and they are far from immune from bias themselves. One of the key arguments in favor of a jury, after all, is the idea that several people's biases will cancel each other out, so that they may arrive at an ultimately fair verdict after their deliberation. Due to their lack of trial experience, judges may indeed be better than jurors at fact-finding and analysis, but again, this does not make formalized judges infallible, and being slightly more fallible does not mean that jurors' capabilities are entirely compromised. In fact, while Japan declined to reinstitute a jury system after the Second World War, the Allied powers were able to convince Japan to adopt the Prosecutorial Review Commission, effectively a grand jury. Beginning in 1948, the PRC would investigate judicial decisions and make recommendations to legal officials. Japan's conviction rate has been so historically high that, rather than a venue favoring the defense, the PRC would often look into the possibility that a rare not guilty verdict might be the result of corruption. The PRC's recommendations were not legally binding until it was revised along with the creation of the Leger system in 2009, but it was still an influential body, according to Maruta and an analysis by Hiroshi Fukurai. As for the cost argument, Maruta retorted that judicial spending at the time overall was less than 1% of the country's budget, claiming that such expenditures are not so costly on the whole. I will note that the only citation for this source is the name of a supposed attorney Inamoto. Searching anything similar to Inamoto 1968 has yielded no relevant results. I have also been unable to find any statistics, past or present, on how much Japan has spent on either its trials or the judicial branch in general. If anyone is able to provide sources and information on these fronts, I would greatly appreciate it. Back to the case, it's time for the first trial day. Vera is finally willing to talk about herself, even if she emotes only through sketches. The judge and Clavier begin by discussing the use of the jurist system and briefly touch upon the poison before calling Spark Brushel to the stand. Apparently, even the tiniest amount of atroquinine can kill someone. Spark claims that the only people around were himself, the victim, and the defendant. The judge decides to make for a little TV and notes that Spark could have been the one to poison Drew, before Apollo provides the actual cross-examination and asks about the poisoning. While the reporter initially theorizes that Vera poisoned her father's coffee, he reveals that he fell over as soon as his lips touched the cup. This wouldn't be too big of a contradiction were it not for the particular poison involved. Atroquinine specifically doesn't react immediately. Its victims have around 15 minutes to live. If Vera had poisoned his coffee, Drew would have lived to drink it. This would blow the case wide open if it's all true, but Clavier presses Spark to settle this matter quickly for the sake of his story. It seems a little out of character for Clavier, and I mentioned during Turnabout Serenade that he acts similarly in order to keep suspicion on the defendant. However, I think that he just wants to find the truth to a fault, to explore the reality behind this game's crimes. Spark insists that Drew died right after he started to drink, and Clavier's begun to realize that this case is much darker than it looks. Spark testifies about the 15 minutes before he drank his coffee, and mentions that Drew was sealing a yellow envelope shut. Another contradiction pops up, however. The only envelope at the crime scene was red, and it's addressed to Drew Misham, not from. Spark's not done talking about the letter. He claims that Drew put the envelope into the box, and while the judge dismisses it as irrelevant, he asks the court to look at the contents of the red envelope. The letter, being from 7 years ago, makes Spark twitch enough that even the judge is able to perceive it. He testifies that he effectively blackmailed Drew concerning something that happened 7 years ago. The pieces ought to be coming together now. Apollo perceives the witness more thoroughly, and it's revealed to the court that Drew is a forger, which Spark already knew. He elaborates that Drew was even involved in forging evidence, and Apollo claims that someone from the underworld could have had reason to want him dead, but there's no proof. Spark claims that nothing left the studio after Drew died, apart from himself, but his recent testimony mentioned that the victim put a letter in his mailbox. So what? So, in order to send a letter, you need to lick a stamp. Drew could have licked a poisoned stamp and then started to drink his coffee, right as his time ran out. But there were no stamps at the scene whatsoever. In fact, there's only the absence of a stamp on a tiny frame doused with atroquinine. If someone did want to kill Drew Misham, a poisoned stamp would be the perfect weapon, and the letter in the red envelope instructs him to use an enclosed stamp. But there's no proof, is there? It's not nice to become a Fraulein, Clavier. Emma gets the judge's permission to examine the physical letter, and there are stamp-shaped traces of a trochonine on one of its pages. It's possible that Drew realized the stamp would have killed him and thus neglected to use it for 7 years, but if that's all true, why would he use it now? Maybe he didn't realize. Maybe the forger himself was a fake. Someone other than Drew Misham set the stamp aside. Someone other than Drew Misham was the real forger. The only person who it could be, the only other person living in the studio, is the defendant, Vera Misham. Fascinating. Arguments both for and against the jury system are multifold. While a jury of laypersons is capable of interpreting laws in ways that fit their community standards and handing down verdicts that the average citizen feels is fair, traditional setups force consistency and continuity between rulings. A jury means that every voice is heard, but if some of those voices would corrupt the law for their own benefit, a rigid, legalistic approach becomes ideal. Following the Second World War, Japan's legal system had become so legalistic and bureaucratic that there was only one officialized law school in the nation. Several nationwide systems have been put in place to ensure uniformity among judicial systems. As of the late 2000s, just before the lay judge system was to be implemented, Japan only had one jurisdiction, with the same criminal laws applying to the whole of the country. To ensure that judges at all levels of the system are keen to follow judicial standard, even prestigious members of the Secretariat, the governing body of the Supreme Court, would be assigned to lower courts. If a lower court's judge questions their own decision, they would often seek advice from the Secretariat, whose opinions were almost always followed. The Supreme Court had spent more than half a century opposing any interference to what it saw as its sacred duty, whether from the concept of a layperson's jury or from any dissenting judges within the judiciary itself. The 70s and 80s saw several decades-late acquittals of death row inmates, emblazoning calls for reform. The Supreme Court lightly entertained the idea, with studies of foreign jury systems and mock trials for citizens, but the greatest push for a jury, says Ingram Weber, legal scholar of the University of Pennsylvania, came thanks to economic turmoil. The Supreme Court was just one example of Japan's overly bureaucratic government, which the people blamed for the collapse of their economy heading into the 90s. Japan wanted more transparency and accessibility into the workings of their government, including their courts. By the end of the century, the Judicial System Reform Council was set in place, encouraging discussion on all judiciary matters, including the potential implementation of a jury system. The JSRC, made up of those in the legal profession, reasoned that lay people's participation was necessary to restore faith in the court system, and that such participation would require more efficient trials on the whole. Jury trials would give voice to the diversifying values and beliefs of the Japanese people as well. Some in the council even argued that career judges, being secluded from society at large due to their often elite backgrounds and time spent behind the bench, were unable to properly hand down decisions aligning with the values of their citizens. However, the Supreme Court did not wish to give all judicial control to a jury, and a compromise was reached. A mixed jury system meant for use only in the most serious of cases, such as those involving the death penalty. Typically, such cases involve 6 laypeople and 3 professional judges, though other combinations, such as 4 laypeople and 1 judge, are meant for simpler trials. At least 1 professional and 1 lay judge must each subscribe to the overall majority opinion for it to become valid. In this way, there is a sort of balance between the bureaucracy and the public of Japan's courts, and there must be at least some agreement between long-standing officials and society at large. We shall discuss the ramifications of this system later. It is time to return to the case at hand. Apollo and Trucy regroup in the defendant lobby, along with Vera, the true forger behind her father, Drew Misham. Her backstory is pretty simple. Like a lot of characters in this game, they needed money. They needed hope. Drew saw that Vera had a talent for forging whatever he could ask of her, and she started taking orders at 12. Trucy asks about the sketches at the studio, and Vera explains that her father had been following the writing co-law offices, and was excited to hear that they had returned to the legal world. Vera starts to bite her nails as soon as she enters the courtroom, and stares intensely at Clavier as soon as she notices him. She does answer, however, that she was indeed the forger, shielded by the victim. Clavier asks her to testify about the red envelope, and she says that it's from her first work besides a painting. I think it's a huge missed opportunity to have Vera's talents be, minor spoilers, irrelevant to this case per se. She could have forged something to prove her own innocence, for instance. Back to what actually happened instead of what could have been, Apollo and Clavier ask about the murderous stamp that came with the letter, and she stares at the prosecutor again before explaining that she kept it, not because she knew it was poisonous, but because it had a picture of her favorite magicians. Favorite magicians? Uh-oh. Gramarye. What's with Gavin?
Might I ask just one question of this witness? In your testimony just now, you stated this was your first work that was other than a painting. Please, tell me, what exactly did you make?
Can I ask what?
No! Answer the question! Now! Hey! Prosecutor Gavin, you're usually not the one whose volume concerns me. Yes, it's unbecoming of me. I apologize. But I must know. Please, Miss Mission, tell me. It was a book. A single page in a book. A book! Please be more specific. It was a handwritten book. Like a diary. No! I don't... No!
Evidently, Clavier knows much more about this girl's works than even he realized before now.
What's wrong with Prosecutor Gavin? He looks like he just saw a ghost. Miss Bisham, this book... Was there a picture of a silk hat on the back cover? Yes or no? How did you know? Prosecutor Gavin, the defendant is answering all of your questions. Stop badgering her. He's told you nothing, has he? Your soiled, studied mentor, nothing. Sullied who? That's right. Who else? Daddy? He never told you about the trial 7 years ago. About how we came to lose his attorney's badge. It was a certain piece of evidence that decided his fate, you know. A certain diary. On the back, it bore the mark of a silk hat. What?! Phoenix Wright tossed out of the profession by false evidence. And the forger who made that evidence is this girl standing right in front of me! Vera, you must tell us. The evidence you made was used in a trial 7 years ago. Who asked Drew Misham, you, to forge that evidence? For all of our sakes, who was it? We only met once. You met the client. Well, who was it? It was... What's going on with Vera? She's staring at Prosecutor Gavin's face again. Yes, what? Is there something about me? I remember clearly. I remember who gave me the book, the diary. Who was it? Vera!
This case is proving to be delightfully complex, isn't it? Phoenix said that the defendant was almost certainly guilty, but he obviously has some connection to the victim, and so does Clavier. What was presented as a simple case with a single witness is ballooned into a 7-year saga, and much more is yet to be revealed. This case escalates itself brilliantly, from the beginning of the investigation to the end of this trial. First, artist Drew Misham is dead, and Vera Misham, his daughter, is the defendant. Bits and pieces are revealed throughout the investigation. Trucy's seemingly random pink envelope makes Valen talk about her father and his former partner, and the seemingly innocuous Grammarys later turn up as Vera's favorite magicians. The diary having a silk hat should clue you in that we're about to discover much more about their troupe, but I do wish to talk about the present just a bit more. Spark Brussels' involvement in the case also reveals itself to run deeper and deeper as things progress. From a random reporter to the one who performed Drew's interview, and it's revealed through the trial that even he knew about Drew's forgeries, and of a certain 7-year-old incident. Now that everything's been laid out, it should be pretty obvious what that 7-year secret of Drew's is, or rather, of Vera's. It's been hinted at since the very first case, but it's finally time to see just how Phoenix Wright lost his attorney's badge.